The December air in New York City was bitter and unforgiving. Snowflakes swirled under the streetlights, sticking to sidewalks and clinging to the coats of hurried pedestrians. The city sparkled with Christmas lights, and holiday tunes hummed softly from stores and coffee shops. But for Jonathan Grant, the magic of the season was nothing more than a commercial ploy. Jonathan strode briskly down Fifth Avenue, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the icy pavement. The weight of his responsibility as CEO of Grant Enterprises bore down on his shoulders, though he never let it show. He was, as always, impeccably dressed, a tailored black wool coat over a navy suit, a silk tie knotted with precision. His grey eyes were cold and calculating, scanning the street without really seeing it. Tonight was Christmas Eve. For most, it was a time of warmth and family, of fires crackling and stories shared. For Jonathan, it was just another night, another opportunity to finish a deal or review a proposal. He wasn't the type to waste time on sentiment. As he turned the corner toward his sleek black Mercedes parked a block away, he noticed a small figure standing by the entrance to a department store. A little girl, no older than 8, was clutching a piece of paper in her gloved hands. Her red coat looked worn, the hem frayed, and patches of faded fabric peeking through. Her dark curls tumbled out from beneath a knitted hat, and her eyes, bright and curious, locked onto him. Jonathan instinctively tightened his jaw, preparing to ignore whatever plea she was about to make. He wasn't in the habit of indulging street-side charity cases, but the girl didn't ask for money. Instead, she took a determined step forward and held out the crumpled paper. "Hey, sir," she called out, her voice clear despite the cold. "My mum said you need to read this alone." He stopped, caught off guard. His breath puffed in the cold air. For a second they stood there, the world around them fading into the quiet hush of falling snow. Her eyes, a startling shade of brown, held a sincerity that was both disarming and unsettling. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Who's your mother?" "She said you'd know after you read the note," the girl replied, stubbornness etched into her delicate features. She thrust the paper toward him again. "Please, it's important." He hesitated, glancing around the busy street as if expecting cameras or a prank. But there was nothing suspicious, just this tiny girl with a message she was desperate for him to read. Against his better judgment, he took the note from her cold fingers. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, without waiting for a response, she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Jonathan stared at the crumpled paper in his hand, his pulse inexplicably quickening. He unfolded it carefully, his eyes narrowing as he read the shaky handwriting. "Jonathan, I promised myself I wouldn't contact you again, but there's something you need to know. Please, read this in private. L." His heart clenched. Only one person in his life signed notes that way. L. For years he had pushed thoughts of her to the furthest corner of his mind, locking them away beneath layers of ambition and success. Seeing her initial now was like pulling a bandage off an old festering wound. Without thinking, he stuffed the note into his pocket and glanced around. The girl was gone, swallowed up by the festive crowd. He rubbed his temples, an unfamiliar sense of unease creeping over him. The street, once so clear and predictable, now felt distorted, as though he had stumbled into someone else's life. The sleek interior of his penthouse offered little comfort. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering skyline, but the chill of the note stayed with him. Jonathan poured a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid reflecting the lights from the towering Christmas tree in the corner, a decoration his assistant had insisted upon. He never bothered to turn it on. He set the glass down unopened and pulled the note from his pocket, smoothing out the wrinkles. The paper felt fragile in his hands, as though it might dissolve under the weight of what it carried. He took a deep breath and continued reading. "Jonathan, I thought I could handle everything on my own, but life has a way of proving us wrong. There's something you should know, something that changes everything." He frowned, his mind racing. The words were cryptic, the handwriting rushed. He could almost see her sitting at a cafe table, pen in hand, her dark hair falling around her face as she scribbled out the words. His chest tightened. Why now? Why after all these years? "Her name is Emma. She's 8 years old. She's the best thing that ever happened to me, and she deserves to know where she comes from." The room tilted, the carefully constructed walls of his life cracking at the foundation. He sank into a leather armchair, the note slipping from his fingers. Emma, the little girl with the red coat, her stubborn eyes and determined voice. His mind replayed the scene outside the department store, her confidence, Her insistence, his daughter. A ragged breath escaped his lips. Jonathan Grant, the man who had everything, power, influence, wealth, had missed the one thing that truly mattered. He hadn't just walked away from Elle all those years ago. He'd walked away from a life he didn't know existed. He buried his face in his hands, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. Memories surged to the surface, nights spent arguing about priorities, about love and ambition. He had chosen his career over her, convinced that he was doing the right thing. But now, sitting alone in his cold, empty penthouse, he wondered if he had sacrificed more than he ever realized. His phone buzzed on the table, a notification breaking the silence. He reached for it with numb fingers. It was a message from an unknown number. "She still believes in you, don't let her down." There was no signature, but he didn't need one. He knew who it was from. The Christmas lights outside twinkled like distant stars, each one a reminder of the choices he had made, and the ones still left to make. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt something shift inside him, a flicker of hope buried beneath the layers of regret. He stood, his resolve hardening. He had spent his life chasing deals and contracts, but tonight he had one chance to reclaim something real. The clock was ticking, the night slipping away. He couldn't let it end like this. Throwing on his coat, he headed for the door, the note clutched tightly in his hand. This Christmas Eve he was going to find his daughter. Jonathan's footsteps echoed through the lobby of his building as he stepped out into the cold night. The world felt sharper, more real than it had in years. His breath misted in front of him as he walked toward his car, hands clenched into fists. The weight of the note pressed against his chest, a constant reminder of everything he had missed. The streets were quieter now, most people tucked into their homes or gathered around fireplaces with loved ones. The festive lights, once just a meaningless blur, now seemed to mock him. He climbed into the Mercedes and gripped the steering wheel tightly. For the first time in years, Jonathan Grant didn't have a plan, but he knew where he had to go. He punched an address into the GPS, one that had been burned into his memory long ago, a small apartment on the Lower East Side. He hadn't been there in years, but he knew she wouldn't have moved far. Elle had always loved the neighborhood's raw energy, the sense of community, the way it felt like home. As he drove through the city, memories assaulted him. The night spent walking these same streets hand in hand with her, laughing over late-night pizza, arguing about his long hours at work. She had believed in him back then, believed that he could be more than just a ruthless businessman. But he'd let her down again and again until she had no choice but to walk away. And now she had raised their daughter alone. His fingers tightened on the wheel. Emma. The name felt both foreign and familiar, like a song he'd once known by heart but had forgotten. He tried to imagine her life, her first steps, her first words, her birthdays. How many moments had he missed? The thought was unbearable. He parked the car across the street from the apartment building and stared up at the second-floor windows. The soft glow of Christmas lights framed the glass, and for a moment he let himself hope. He stepped out of the car, his shoes crunching against the snow, and crossed the street. His hand shook as he pressed the buzzer. A familiar voice crackled through the intercom. "Hello?" He swallowed hard. It's me." There was a long pause. He could almost hear her breath catch. "What are you doing here, Jonathan?" Her voice was wary, guarded. "I need to see you. Please." Another pause. Then the door buzzed open. Jonathan climbed the narrow stairs, his heart pounding with each step. When he reached her door, it swung open before he could knock. There she was, Elle, standing in the soft light of her apartment, wearing a simple sweater and jeans. Her dark hair was pulled back, and her eyes were as piercing as ever. Time had barely touched her, but there was a new hardness around her mouth, a weariness he didn't remember. She looked at him for a long moment, her arms crossed over her chest. "You're late." His throat tightened. "I know." She stepped aside, allowing him in. The apartment was small but warm, filled with the scent of cinnamon and pine. A modest Christmas tree stood in the corner, adorned with handmade ornaments. The walls were lined with bookshelves and framed photos of Emma. He scanned the room, taking in every detail, trying to piece together the life that had unfolded without him. Elle closed the door and turned to face him. "Why are you here, Jonathan?" He pulled the crumpled note from his pocket and held it out to her. "She gave me this. Outside a store tonight." Her eyes softened as she took the paper from his hand. "Emma wanted you to know." "Why now?" he asked, his voice raw. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She let out a shaky breath and sank onto the couch. I didn't think you wanted to know. You made your choice, Jonathan. Your work, your ambition, those things were more important than us. I couldn't force you to be a father. He sat beside her, his hands clasped together. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was building a life that would make us both proud. And did it? She asked, her eyes searching his face. Are you proud of what you've built? He looked away, the walls of his carefully constructed life crumbling. No, he admitted, not anymore. A silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken words. He glanced at the photos on the wall, snapshots of Emma at different ages, smiling, playing, growing. His heart ached with a longing he couldn't describe. Where is she? He asked softly. She's asleep, Elle said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to wake her. He nodded, disappointment tightening his chest. But he understood. He had no right to barge into her life, to disrupt her world, just because he finally decided to show up. Does she know about me? He asked. Elle hesitated. She knows you exist. I told her you were busy, that you had important work to do. He flinched at the words. Important work. Nothing seemed important now except the little girl sleeping in the next room. I want to meet her, he said, his voice trembling. If she'll let me. Elle studied him, her eyes filled with pain and uncertainty. Jonathan, she's just a child. I can't let you hurt her. I won't, he promised. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to try. I want to be her father. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly. It's not that simple. I know, he said, but I have to try. They sat in silence, the weight of the past pressing down on them. Finally, Elle sighed. She's been asking about you more and more lately. I think she's ready. Hope flared in his chest. Thank you. She stood and walked to the hallway. Wait here. Jonathan's heart pounded as he watched her disappear down the hall. He heard the soft creak of a door, a whispered conversation. His palms were sweating, his breath shallow. This was the most important moment of his life, and he was terrified he would ruin it. A minute later, Elle returned with Emma at her side. The little girl's dark curls were tousled from sleep, her eyes blinking in the dim light. She clutched a stuffed bear to her chest, her red pajamas patterned with snowflakes. She looked at him with curiosity and a hint of caution. Jonathan's throat tightened. She was beautiful, with her mother's eyes and a stubborn tilt to her chin that he recognized all too well. Emma, Elle said gently. This is Jonathan. Emma tilted her head. Are you my daddy? The word hit him like a punch to the gut. He nodded, his voice caught in his throat. Yes, I am. She studied him for a moment, then took a tentative step forward. Mommy said you were busy. Are you still busy? No, he whispered. Not anymore. Her eyes searched his face, and for a moment he thought she might turn away. But then she reached out, her small hand brushing against his. Do you want to see my Christmas tree? His breath caught. I'd love to. A smile broke across her face, small and shy, but it lit up the room. She took his hand and led him to the tree, her excitement growing with each step. Elle watched them, her eyes shining with tears. Jonathan knelt beside his daughter, his heart swelling with a love he'd never known. He didn't know what the future held, or if he could ever make up for the time he'd lost. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. And this Christmas Eve, that was enough. The warmth of Elle's apartment contrasted sharply with the cold dread curling in Jonathan's stomach. He sat on the plush carpet beside Emma, watching her little hands arrange ornaments on the Christmas tree. The sparkle in her eyes was a beacon of innocent joy, a joy he was terrified of destroying. He had missed everything. The first steps, the birthdays, the scraped knees, the bedtime stories. But here she was, giving him a chance to be part of her life. The weight of it all pressed against his chest, making each breath shallow. You see this one? Emma said, holding up a snowflake-shaped ornament with a shaky smile. I made it in school last year. Jonathan took the fragile ornament carefully, his fingers brushing against hers. It's beautiful. You're very talented. Emma's eyes lit up, and she nodded proudly. Mom says I have a good imagination. She's right. He tried to smile, but it felt tight. The weight of what he had to say, what he had to admit, coiled in his mind like a viper. From the corner of his eye, Jonathan saw Elle watching them, her arms wrapped around herself, eyes filled with uncertainty. He knew that look. It was the same look she had given him the night she left, the night he didn't fight hard enough to make her stay. Emma moved to grab another ornament, but her tiny hands faltered, and it slipped from her grasp. The glass shattered against the hardwood floor. "Oh no!" Emma's eyes went wide, her lip trembling. Jonathan's instinct kicked in, and he reached out to comfort her. "Hey, it's okay. We can fix it." Tears welled in her eyes. "But it was my favorite." He looked into those big, innocent eyes, and a painful realization twisted in his gut. He couldn't fix everything, not with glue, not with apologies, not with empty promises. But he could try to be there, to pick up the pieces he had left scattered in his absence. Elle knelt beside Emma, wrapping her in a gentle hug. "Accidents happen, sweetheart. We'll get another one." Emma sniffled and nodded, her tears drying quickly. "Okay, Mommy." Jonathan watched them, his heart splitting in two. He wanted to be part of their world, but standing on the outside made him question if he deserved it. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. "Emma," he said softly, "can I talk to your mum for a minute?" She nodded, already distracted by the twinkling lights on the tree. Jonathan rose to his feet and met Elle's gaze. Her eyes were guarded, her body tense. They stepped into the kitchen, where the faint scent of cinnamon lingered. Elle leaned against the counter, her arms folded tightly across her chest. The silence between them grew thick, almost suffocating. "What is it, Jonathan?" Her voice was steady, but he could hear the cracks beneath the surface. He ran a hand through his hair, his fingers trembling. "I need to know the truth, Elle. Why now? Why did you decide to let me back in?" She exhaled, her eyes glistening. It wasn't an easy decision. Emma kept asking about her father. "She deserves to know you, to at least have the chance to decide if she wants you in her life." He swallowed hard. "And you, do you want me in her life?" She looked away, her jaw tight. "I don't know. I'm afraid you'll hurt her, that you'll get bored or decide she doesn't fit into your world." He flinched. The accusation, though unspoken, cut deep. "I'm not that man anymore. Aren't you?" She met his gaze, the pain in her eyes almost unbearable. "You walked away once. What's stopping you from doing it again?" Jonathan's chest ached. "I walked away from you, not her. I didn't know she existed." "That doesn't make it any easier," she whispered. "She's just a little girl, Jonathan. She doesn't understand broken promises or second chances." He took a step closer, his voice trembling. "I want to be here. I want to try. Please, give me that chance." Her eyes searched his face, looking for any trace of the man she had once loved. Finally she nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Okay, but if you hurt her, I won't forgive you." "I won't," he promised, his voice raw. They stood there, the weight of the moment settling between them, a fragile truce built on hope and the thin threads of possibility. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt like he was standing on the edge of something real, and he was terrified. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep again, Jonathan and Elle sat on the couch, the silence stretching between them. The soft glow of the Christmas tree bathed the room in warmth, but Jonathan's mind churned with doubt. "I have to ask," he said quietly, "why didn't you tell me back then?" Elle's fingers traced the edge of her coffee cup. "I wanted to, Jonathan, but every time I picked up the phone, I remembered how much you didn't want a family, how you were so focused on your career. I thought you'd resent us." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "I was an idiot." Her eyes softened. "Maybe we both were." The distant sound of carolers filtered in through the window, a reminder that the world outside was still moving, still celebrating. But here, in this small apartment, time felt suspended. "Jonathan," she said suddenly, her voice tight with emotion, "there's something else you need to know." His heart stuttered. The fear in her eyes, the hesitation in her voice, it clawed at his insides. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her fingers trembling. "Emma, she's sick." The room spun. He gripped the arm of the couch, his pulse roaring in his ears. "What do you mean she's sick?" "Leukemia," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "She was diagnosed 6 months ago." The words hit him like a freight train, shattering every illusion he had left. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Images of his daughter, her bright eyes, her shy smile, blurred with the weight of the revelation. Is she going to be okay?" His voice cracked. "They caught it early," she said, her voice shaking. "She's responding to treatment. But it's a long road, Jonathan. She needs stability. She needs people who love her." His chest felt like it was caving in. The thought of losing her, of never having the chance to make things right, was unbearable. "I want to help. I need to help." Elle wiped her tears away, her eyes fierce. "Then be here. Be the father she needs. Don't just show up tonight and disappear when things get hard." "I won't," he vowed, his voice a raw whisper. "I'm here. For both of you." For the first time in his life, Jonathan Grant understood what it meant to be powerless. To be at the mercy of something greater than himself. His wealth, his influence, his carefully constructed life, none of it mattered now. The only thing that mattered was the little girl sleeping in the next room, and the woman who had carried the burden alone for so long. Elle took his hand, her fingers cold but steady. "We'll take it one step at a time." He nodded, tears burning his eyes. One step at a time. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white. The carolers' voices faded into the night, but their song lingered in the air, a soft, fragile hope that refused to be extinguished. Jonathan closed his eyes, his hand still holding Elle's. For the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of the future. He was ready to fight for it. The snowstorm had quieted by the time Jonathan left Elle's apartment, the cold air biting against his cheeks as he stood in the doorway. His mind was a whirlpool of emotions, fear, regret, determination, all swirling around the devastating truth that Emma was sick. He couldn't change the past, couldn't take back the years he'd lost, but he could fight for the future. Elle stood beside him, her arms wrapped tightly around her waist. Her eyes, though red from tears, held a fragile hope. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his jaw tight with resolve. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I know I can't walk away. Not again." She nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing just a fraction. "She has another round of treatment the day after tomorrow. You can come with us if you want." "I'll be there," he promised, the weight of his words sinking deep into his bones. They shared a long, quiet look, two people standing on the edge of something new and uncertain. Then she stepped back, her hand on the door. "Good night, Jonathan." "Good night, Elle." As the door closed softly, he let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The cold seemed sharper now, but for the first time in years it didn't numb him. He felt everything, the pain, the fear, the desperate hope, and he welcomed it. He wasn't the same man who had walked away all those years ago. He couldn't be. Jonathan spent the next day in a fog of preparation and reflection. He rescheduled meetings, delegated tasks, and cleared his calendar indefinitely. His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Dana, stared at him in shock when he announced his absence. "Mr. Grant, are you sure about this? The board is expecting you to finalize the acquisition next week." He met her gaze, his voice firm. "I'm sure. Family comes first." It felt strange to say it out loud, to let those words slip into the open, but once they were out, he realized how deeply he meant them. Dana nodded, her expression softening. "Of course. Take all the time you need." That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind filled with images of Emma, her wide eyes, her shy smile, the fragility he hadn't noticed before. The thought of her fighting a disease he couldn't control filled him with a helplessness he'd never experienced. He was used to fixing things, to negotiating outcomes in his favor, but this was different. He needed to be strong for her, to be the father she deserved. The morning of Emma's treatment dawned grey and cold. Jonathan arrived at Elle's apartment just as the city was waking up, his breath fogging in the crisp air. He hesitated for only a moment before knocking. Elle opened the door, surprise flickering across her face. "You're early. I didn't want to risk being late," he said simply. She stepped aside, allowing him in. Emma was sitting on the couch, her small frame wrapped in a thick blanket. Her curls were neatly combed, and she held the stuffed bear tightly in her arms. When she saw him, a smile broke across her face, bright and genuine. "Hi, Daddy." The word sent a jolt through his heart. He crouched down to her level, his eyes soft. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you ready to go?" She nodded, though he could see the nervousness in her eyes. He glanced at Elle, who gave him a small, reassuring smile. "We'll take it one step at a time," she murmured. He reached out and squeezed Emma's hand. "We're in this together." The hospital was a sterile maze of white walls and muted voices. Jonathan's polished shoes clicked softly against the linoleum floor as they walked down the hallway. Emma's small hand clasped in his. Elle walked on her other side, her face calm, but her eyes betraying her worry. They entered the treatment room, a bright space with a recliner chair and an array of medical equipment. The sight of it made Jonathan's stomach twist. Emma climbed into the chair with practiced ease, setting her bear on her lap. A nurse with a kind smile came in, her voice cheerful and gentle. "Good morning, Emma. Are you ready for today?" Emma nodded bravely, though her fingers tightened around her bear. Jonathan watched, his heart aching. How had she grown so strong, so brave without him? The nurse glanced at him. "And who's this?" Emma smiled. "That's my daddy. He's staying with me today." Jonathan swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." As the nurse prepared the IV, Jonathan sat beside Emma, his hand covering hers. Elle stood behind them, a silent pillar of strength. When the needle slid into Emma's arm, her face scrunched up, but she didn't cry. Jonathan's heart splintered, but he held her hand tighter, anchoring both of them. "You're doing great," he whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Her eyes met his, and for a moment the fear melted away. "I'm glad you're here, Daddy." Tears pricked his eyes, but he blinked them back. "Me too, sweetheart, me too." Hours passed in a slow, aching blur. Jonathan watched every drip of the IV, every flutter of Emma's eyelashes as she dozed in the chair. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so powerless, but he also couldn't remember feeling so connected, so present. When the treatment was finally over, Emma was pale and tired, but she managed a small smile. Jonathan lifted her gently into his arms, her head resting against his shoulder. "Let's go home," he murmured. Elle walked beside him, her eyes filled with emotions too tangled to name. As they stepped out into the cold, fresh air, Emma stirred. "Can we get hot chocolate?" she whispered. Jonathan smiled, his heart swelling. "Of course, anything you want." They ended up at a small cafe near the hospital, the kind with fogged-up windows and the rich scent of cocoa and coffee. Jonathan settled Emma into a booth, wrapping her in her blanket. Elle sat across from them, her eyes softening as she watched them together. They sipped their hot chocolate in silence, the warmth seeping into their bones. Jonathan looked at Emma, her eyes brightening with each sip, and felt a peace he hadn't known in years. "Daddy," she said suddenly, her voice small, "will you be here next time?" His throat tightened. He looked at Elle, who held her breath, waiting for his answer. He reached across the table, taking Emma's hand. "I'll be here every time," he promised, "for as long as you need me." Her smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Okay." Elle's eyes shimmered with tears, but she smiled. "Thank you, Jonathan." He met her gaze, his voice firm. "No, thank you, for giving me a second chance." They sat there, the three of them, a fragile family bound by love, pain, and hope. The world outside kept moving, the snow kept falling, but for them, time stood still. It wasn't a perfect ending. There would be more treatments, more fears, more challenges, but for the first time Jonathan knew he wasn't running away. He was exactly where he was meant to be, and this Christmas, that was enough.